So, Latifa Soobedar, CEO of Corporate Wellness here in the UAE. She describes herself as a psychologist, a fitness enthusiast, and an avid reader. She moved here to Dubai, I think about 15 years ago. And her passion is really about connecting people to their purpose and potential. And I know Latifa and Corporate Wellness, her organization, has a lot of contracts and a lot of work with local corporates here in the UAE, where she helps them with their employee assistance programs. And I'm sure she's had a really, really busy year in 2020. So Latifa, welcome so much. Welcome and thank you so much for joining The Other Side with Fariha and Talat. So the topic of this show, Latifa, is called Sink or Swim. And we're calling it Sink or Swim because a lot of times we find, people join organizations and they're expected to, swim or sink or swim, whatever you want to call it. I think, 2020 has, been really traumatic for a lot of people. It's been a traumatic time and experience. So what does that really mean? And how does that impact behaviors in organizations specifically, Latifa?
Thank you, Talat, for the introduction. Also, thank you for the program. I think that it's such an important show that you and Fariha have put on, because I think so many people have so many challenges, especially at this time. And there's just so much out there on the internet, so much to read, and people don't know exactly what do I take on board, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So, when you spoke about trauma, I think it's a word that people have been, using a lot in the last year specifically, because this falls out of the spectrum of what we know to be normal. Right. But I think it's useful to just start off by telling you, there is a difference between stress and trauma. And I think when people know the difference, I think the way you experience situations changes, right? So stress actually, textbook style definition, the wear and tear that our bodies experience as we adapt to changing circumstances, right? And very much involved in that is what we call the fight or flight response. And I think we're all familiar with that. You think now, but because change is such a big part of our life and it's the only constant, our brain has learned to read every change, even positive change, as danger, and initiates the fight or flight response, which results in an excessive amount of adrenaline in your bloodstream, ready to do something, right? Trauma, on the other hand, is your very intensely emotional response to an event that you perceive as negative, right? So a perception of something that is negative and has an element where there is a perceived threat or danger to your life or life of somebody close to you, right? So this is what will initiate. So stress can actually flip over into trauma, but not all stress is actually traumatic. Right? So I think it's so important for us to know that difference, because we use terminology, and that terminology actually initiates certain emotions in us. And I think if we just change the narrative, if we change certain language, it will actually help us to cope better.
Right. Okay. So that's really interesting to know.
The question you asked is about the behaviors at work, right?
Yeah.
And
how does it relate? And, how does that impact people, and what happens to them at work when they're under stress?
So there are so many different things that happen to people when they're under stress. I think I'm just going to focus on what's happening in the last year, what we've been seeing in the last year, because I think it's so relevant. I think initially people were extremely apprehensive because we're working in a completely new environment. Many people were being asked to work from home, right? And so one of the biggest stressors that I'm sure everybody's familiar with is work came home. Right. So we talked so much for years about work-life balance. By the way, we don't talk work-life balance anymore. We talk about work-life integration or work-life synergy, but work actually came home. So those of us who were struggling when work was physically away from home to find that nice boundary between work and life are struggling even more. Right. Absolutely. So one of the biggest stressors is juggling. Where's the line? Where do I say no? At which point saying no is going to actually harm my work reputation, harm my performance review and my bonus, or my ability to retain my job. And I think that fear, and in some cases panic, made a lot of people work excessively when they didn't need to.
What about leadership behaviors at work, Latifa? How, because leaders are just as much, they're also very stressed, just like regular employees are. So how are they manifesting that? And what are some of the signs of stressful leadership?
So, this is a great question and a great subject because, I've run so many workshops in terms of leading in the new normal, as they're calling it. And I think I've been saying this is a very opportunistic time, right? This is a time for great leaders to really emerge and show themselves because they are the ones standing in front of everybody else and probably the ones that were not seen as great leaders before, right? Because what we have seen is an exacerbation of bullying behavior, okay, which I'll talk about in a moment, from leaders, because like you said, leaders themselves are human beings. They're dealing with their own stressors, and a lot of them haven't got the emotional intelligence or the confidence in themselves as leaders to be able to empower and delegate to their people when they don't have eyes on, right? So what you're seeing is a lot of micromanagement, a lot of, and we're calling it death by meetings. I mean, there was death by meetings before, but now everybody is consistently online with meetings, right? Because leaders are panicking that they don't know what their people are doing. So they make sure they schedule meetings at 8 a.m. to make sure that you're up and ready to go. But then they're also scheduling meetings at 10 o'clock at night because, you're at home, so you can just do this meeting. So we're seeing knee-jerk reaction from leaders who don't know how to let go and give that sort of empowerment to their people who actually know what they're doing. So
which goes back to trust, right? It goes back to trust, right? It's about trusting people. And that's what you find missing is they're not trusting their teams, really. Yes. It's about trust.
So we're seeing two types, those who are superbly compassionate and who are very effective communicators. If I can sum it up in a nutshell, we're seeing a lot of bullying because leaders themselves are fearful of their jobs and they're then passing that on down the line. But what we're also seeing is a lot of leaders that are bringing their very, very strong humanness onto the table. So that willingness to share their personal experiences. And I think that's what's changing the game.
For people listening to this show, I think it's important for them to recognize the 3 or 4 physical manifestations that they're going through at work that shows helps them recognize that they're stressed. And if that is happening, what are 2 or 3 really quick fixes or ways to combat that apart from deep breathing?
Yeah, the deep breathing one is the one that amuses me a lot because, when people say breathe, I am breathing, okay? It's what do I do? How do I manage it? But I think, Talat, one important thing is helping people to also understand the difference between anxiety and stress. Because, what we tend to blur them, and actually the tools that we use are different. So anxiety is actually a fear of something which may happen, which most likely will not happen, right? So if you have that, there is a very different cognitive, which is a thinking tool that you need to use. But in the short term, the first stage is you will experience stress. And what is stress? A feeling of discomfort, being out of your comfort zone, right? It's because there's too much of adrenaline in your bloodstream. So what is that? The fight or flight response is doing what? It's putting a lot of adrenaline in your bloodstream, which is giving your muscles energy to fight an enemy or run away from the enemy, right? So your simplest tool, and you're going to laugh because a lot of my clients laugh, just jog on the spot. Jog on the spot for 15 seconds, right? When it comes to anxiety and stress, there is a very powerful mind tool, right? So we know in psychology that our thoughts create our emotions and our emotions create our actions, right? So we call it the TEA model, thoughts, emotions, actions, right? Now, like blinking and breathing, we have automatic thoughts that we have learned from our childhood, the way we process information. And these thoughts, they run like trains that leave the station, right? Automatic. So everything that happens in our environment will trigger automatic thoughts, right? So when I feel stressed and anxious, actually the first thing I need to do is simply say, stop, no. Stop, no. All right. When you say stop, no, or you visualize a red signal, it actually stops the automatic thought and buys your brain time to actually process information more accurately.
So any parting words from you for our audience who are all going to be career professionals, working professionals, any parting words?
I think the most important one I can tell you is just one simple sentence. When you're experiencing whatever range of emotions you're experiencing right now, and you feel like you're losing your mind or something is wrong with you, please just remember this one sentence. You are having a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. So whatever you're feeling is normal. The situation is abnormal right now, right? And just telling yourself that is going to be a game changer for you.
That's fantastic. And that's great advice.